what's up, and welcome to this episode of EST, the podcast for established church leaders by established church leaders. My name is Josh King.
My name is Sam, and it's raining. It's raining here in Florida.
Yeah, so I saw some posts about how you guys were excited about that, and my first thought was, it rains every day in Florida.
Not in the dry season, it doesn't.
Oh, well, sorry.
And we've needed it. It's been a month without rain, so I'm glad.
Well, your entire state is surrounded by water, so, I mean, the rest of us don't feel that bad for you.
No one really feels badly for Floridians. We just a little crazy down here, and
Yeah,
I love every bit of it. Most of our listeners who tune in regularly know, Florida man is a very real person. He's a member of my church, and I
he
love
pastors
him
that church too.
Hey, listen, I'm excited about this episode. We have Drew Provence with us. He is the director of partner engagement at Upward Sports. Welcome to the show, Drew.
Let's go. What's going on, guys? Thanks for having me.
We're glad that you're here, man. It's going to be a good show.
Yeah, Upward is a sponsor of the show, and they have some really great resources. You've likely heard of Upward Sports, and many of our listeners may be utilizing their services, but many are not. And so we certainly want to talk about recreation ministry today. I think it's a real practical sort of thing. Drew's the guy to talk about it. But before we do, we have another sponsor, and we're really grateful to Church Teams as well. Boyd Pelly is the co-founder of Church Teams. He's been on the show too, talking about technology. We're just really, really blessed to have two good sponsors. So we thank you, Church Teams, for all that you do to sponsor the show. It enables us to provide it free for our audience. There's an offer that they'll give you, est.church. You can go to est.church and get the offer from Church Teams. It's 2 months free, so you can get in at no risk when it comes to text to give, scheduling, anything tech related when it comes to software solutions. The Church Teams can do it, and it's scalable for your church, meaning you may say, well, we're a small church, can we afford that? They have pricing for small churches. They have the full suite of tools for large churches. They're do-it-all sort of place, and they offer the best-in-class resources when it comes to technology. So go to est.church to check out the offer from Church Teams. So thank you, Church Teams, for sponsoring the show. And Drew, again, thank you for joining the show. We're going to be talking about recreation ministry and why now is the time every church should consider recreation ministry. And by now, I don't mean like, winter, because we're in winter. But it's just what I mean by that is now is the time, because I don't think enough churches are doing recreation ministry. It was kind of a thing like 20, 30, 40 years ago when we were building these gymnasiums dating back to the 1970s. But the programs that Upward offers is really for any church, not just a church with a gymnasium. And so I'm glad that Drew is on the show to talk about this. Why now, Drew? So we've got a bunch of listeners tuning in. Yeah. I'm assuming a whole slew of them don't do recreation ministry. Why is that important to them?
Yeah, I think you look at it, when you ask the question, why now, you look at it in like two landscapes. There's the sport landscape, the power of sport, which we'll talk about, and then look at just the church landscape right now too. So when you're saying why now, sports ministry, the power of sport is undeniable. When you look at the conversations that happen every day, the people that are playing sport all around you, there's a stat that says 95% of Americans interact, talk about, participate, do something with sports every day. It's incredibly relevant in our culture. Right. The only things that can kind of rival that are food and music. And so you see churches spend a lot of time and investment in using the relevancy of food and music, but sport is the same way. And so it's this huge opportunity to connect with people. You think about the relevancy of sport. You've got the Super Bowl each year. 115 million people tune in for the Super Bowl every year. You think about the most watched sporting and the most watched events in TV altogether. 94 out of 100 of those are sports events. We're a sports crazy culture. This culture is just mad about sports. And so you think about, the power that sports has. It has the power to bring people together too. You just think about togetherness that can happen around sport. If you're on a mission trip or you're in a foreign country, you throw out a ball. people will come running to that ball. And, it's a uniter as well. You think about the division in the country. There's divisions of race. There's divisions of socioeconomics. There's divisions of politics. There's all these silos that are being created. There's arguments about how we've handled the pandemic and all of that. All of that are dividers, and sports is a bridge to be able to connect people together. And it can be this great unifier for people. It really can take people from just totally different backgrounds and put them on the same court together. It allows people to belong on a team together, and you just don't get that in a lot of avenues. And so, you think about sport. The reach is vast. Youth sports in particular. There's 60 million kids that play youth sports in America. 60 million. So there's an enormous amount of kids participating, and the opportunity to reach those kids is huge. And so you look at this power that sports has on the culture, and then you think about the church landscape, which you guys talk about this all the time on this podcast of like what are the trends in the church right now, and they're not that great. There are some good ones, but you look at the overall trends. Between 85 and 90% of churches plateauing in decline. You look at the Southern Baptist Convention this past year having their greatest decline in the last 100 years in a single year, decline in membership. You think about, the rise of the nuns, the Pew Research study from a couple of years ago about the rising amount of people that are religiously unaffiliated in this country, and it's up to 30% now, where it was about 15% 20 years ago. It's like these are all bad trajectories for the church as far as what's happening in the country. And you think about millennials, 59% of millennials that were in church are no longer in church. And so just these negative things that are out there. I don't know if you follow Dr. Ryan Burge or not, but he put out a book a couple of months ago about the dechurched group, right? And so dechurched, for any listener out there, is somebody that used to attend church and no longer is attending church. And so over the last 20 years, there's been about 40 million people per se that he did some research on that fall in this category of dechurched individuals. These are people that were in church and they're no longer in church. And there's some really interesting findings in that. When I think about a dechurched person, the first thing I think about is like, well, the Josh Harris types, right? I'm deconstructing my faith. I'm maybe been burned by the church, or I'm not trusting of an institution. Those types of things. That's like, oh, that's the dechurched person. They were there and they're not there anymore. And there are some people like that in this 40 million group that Ryan Burge was studying, but it's only about a quarter of that 40 million. It's only 25% of the 40 million in that group. And so you might be wondering, and which his study was looking into, is like, well, why did they leave? Why are people gone right now? And the majority, about 3/4 of the rest of that group, it was as a matter of convenience. They moved. They got another job. Their job works on Sundays. They got a divorce. They have financial challenges. Something happened in their life that the convenience of going to church is what pulled them away. And the cool thing about it, so I say all that, it's like, oh, wow, that's a big number, 30 million people that are dechurched. I say all that to say, like, man, the cool thing is most of these people, according to the research, is they're open to coming back to church. They're open to coming back if somebody invites them. And so you look at the power of sports, you look at the trends that are negative, but then you see this opportunity of people that are open to coming back to church. And so it's really this question of like, man, if I'm a church leader, what does my invite look like to invite these people back to church? A lot of people are talking about re-engaging their community after the pandemic, re-engaging folks, and it's still true today, even a couple years post-pandemic, of like, man, what does your invite look like when you're thinking about your community? How are you inviting people back into the community of your church? And you think about sports. Yeah, and this is the last thing I'll say on that. Yeah. Go ahead, Josh.
Well, I was just going to say, like, when we're talking about sports and that re-engaging that group, I'm just curious about, like, if somebody was to get started and so they're listening to you and they're like, there's this huge unengaged group. We got to get them engaged. We're going to use sports to do it. Before you even get started, what does a successful, like, rec ministry look like? What is the target that they're trying to reach? What would be a win for a church?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, when you think about a successful sports ministry and what that would look like. It's all about reaching people. So if you're talking about reaching people, there's a crazy stat in sports ministry with us that half the participants that play in an Upward Sports League, they have no church affiliation. They're unchurched, right? So if you're talking about reaching people and half the participants are unchurched, that's a huge amount of opportunity. The average league is about 160 kids, and so 80 is half of that group. So 80 kids are not affiliated with a church. It's not just them. They have a family member that's with them, probably a parent or a grandparent or a sibling. They're on your campus each Saturday, and so you multiply that. You're talking about 300 people on your campus on a Saturday, and so a successful sports ministry is reaching people. When you look at what makes a sports ministry successful, the ingredients of that, you got to have development of the athlete. You got to develop kids, not just in the sport, right? There's got to be total development. We talk about developing kids mentally, athletically, spiritually, and socially. That total development of an athlete, and that's based off of Luke 2:52, when Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. And so that total development of athletes is critical if you're saying, man, if I'm going to have a successful sports ministry, I need to make sure I'm developing kids in the right way. And then secondly, having organization. And that's where Upward comes in a lot, of just providing the organization, the knowledge, the history of what we've learned through the years. And you've got to provide clear communication. You cannot, have your coach not communicating with parents throughout the year, nobody knowing what's going on. You've got to have a fun environment. This is similar to a kids ministry at your church, right? This translates to that. You've got to have a fun environment. You've got to have something that people feel comfortable and welcome when they're in your court or your field. Like, those are components of a great experience. And then the last thing I'll say, if it's all about connecting with people and building relationships, you got to be intentional. So, when you think about that great, successful experience, player development, and then the overall quality of excellence of communication, organization, all of those things, and that's where Upward really strives to take the administrative burden off of a leader to say, hey, let's make this quality, let's make it first class, organized, detailed, and make a difference with the opportunity that we have.
All right, so this is what excites me. At Church Answers, we get all sorts of questions about, well, I can boil it. It gets asked in many different ways, but I can boil it down to like one question: How do I reach my community? How do I get connected to the community? How do I get into the community? How do I know my community? That's the gist of the question. Is I want to reach people in my neighborhood. How do I do that? And I tell them there's a couple of ways you can do this. Get involved in fostering, the foster system, because you're going to get connected to some of the worst problems in the community doing that. And then recreation ministry, like what you just said. So you said the average Upward program at a church is roughly 160 kids. Did I hear that right?
That's right.
So let's say, you get started and it's half that size. Let's say you're just getting started and, it's about half that. Goodness gracious, that means that if half are unengaged, you've got 40 kids, it's 20. Well, if you've got 80 kids, that means 40 kids are, you've just now got connected to 40 kids and their families. And tell me another program that enables you to do that. There isn't one, not to that scale that any church can do. So I think a lot of churches are just missing this opportunity. Oh, by the way, I understand, when I tell churches they need to foster, it's like, wow, that's quite a commitment. That's a big deal. Well, I know you got sports fans in your church. I know you got sports fans that wouldn't mind coaching, helping, serving, because they just like sports. This is about as easy an outreach sell to your congregation as you're going to find. So I just want our listeners to get that in their brains. Like, how do I know I'm supposed to reach people. I know I'm supposed to do outreach. I know I'm supposed to reach my neighborhood. How do I do that? Well, you can do the hard stuff, which is fostering. And I encourage every church to consider that. And I think every church should. And you can do what is more readily accessible to your congregation. And oh, by the way, Upward will help you organize it all, as Drew just said. They can help with the administrative side of it. To me, this is one of the easiest wins that a church can do, a church of any size. So let's talk about that, because, Drew, I think a lot of people listening may go, well, I've seen Upward, I've been part of Upward, or There's a church that I knew once that did it, and it was a large suburban church. They had 6 gyms. Can any size church do this, or is this just for that giant suburban church?
Yeah, the church with 6 gyms. I'd love to have a church with 6 gyms.
Well, they're out.
But,
I'm just saying they're out
yeah.
there. I know of a few. I mean, 4.
Yeah.
I think 4 is the biggest one I've seen.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
I was speaking in hyperbole. But you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
There are
exactly.
some churches that have
Yeah.
that. What do you do with the church that doesn't have that?
Yeah, it's a fallacy that that's the only church that can do it for sure. I mean, it's amazing. It's so cool. I love the question. It's so cool to see the variety of churches. Every church is unique, and the variety of churches that we get the opportunity to partner with are vast. I mean, we're all across the country in 47 states, in inner city New York to the suburbs of LA to the farmland of Alabama. I mean, it's all over. And so, you take some examples. There's a great church that we partner with in Deatsville, Alabama. They have 30 members in their church. This is a church. It's a real church, Harvest Fields Church in Deatsville, Alabama. They have 30 members and 1 staff person. And would you believe it? Out of their soccer and flag football league, they reach over 100 kids in that 30-member church with a field outside their church. And it's the coolest thing. Every year you hear the stories of life change that happen through that, the stories that are God moments that are happening through this sports ministry. They're being intentional with the opportunity they have. And what I love about it is they see themselves kind of like Gideon's army, right? So if you're at a smaller church right now, they're doing a lot with little. And I just love that example of a church that's like, man, they're not your typical church that you would think that would run sports ministry. There's others too. There's a cool one that we worked with a couple of years ago in Grand Rapids, Michigan. In the inner city of Grand Rapids, the church wanted to plant a campus in inner city Grand Rapids. It was a Hispanic community, very low income, kind of a gang area, rough area. So the church wants to plant, and before planting the church, they wanted to build relationships with the community around them. So they said, hey, let's start an upward sports league in the community to build those relationships with the neighborhoods around us, and then we'll plant the church. So cool. They do this soccer league, and they have about 130 kids that sign up. And in the soccer league, at the end of the season, they're celebrating the season. They present the gospel, and at the gospel presentation, they had over 90 people accept Christ in that gospel presentation, and then that laid the seeds for the church plant. And so I think about those examples of like, man, that is not the big suburb church that has got all the resources. They've got nothing. I mean, they've got some grass. That's all they had. And if you don't have a gym, if you're at a church and you don't have a gym, there's gyms all over your community that aren't being used. There's probably churches that have vacant gyms that may not have the idea to start sports ministry yet. So even if you don't have a gym, you could partner with another church to do that. We have a lot of churches that will use schools. And so if there's a school in your community to be open to collaborating with you, they want to see kids active in the community. And so if you approach them about having a basketball league in your school, that's a great opportunity. We see churches all over take advantage of that. And the partnership is really cool too. When churches partner together to be able to reach the kingdom through sports, that's a really, really neat example.
The upside down logic to it is actually, if you are in a smaller community and you're not in those big giant suburbs with those big giant churches, that sort of stuff, those suburbs usually have city leagues for kids and YMCA and things like that. Those smaller communities without all of those city leagues would be a massive opportunity there that the church can step into and really fill a gap that's filled, that a lot of the people want. They want those leagues in there. And you might even be, in our community, as far as city league goes, it's just basketball and volleyball. That's it. And so if soccer steps in or flag football or something like that steps in, I could see it being a real draw for people. Whereas in the previous community I came from, the city flag football sort of league was the biggest thing in the community. So it's actually working for those rural areas when you don't really think it would.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And even if you're in an area that has a lot of different kinds of leagues, my family is a good example of, would we be interested in Upward? Absolutely, because while my kids do sports and they do sports in some of the local leagues, we're not we're not a travel sports family. Let me just put it that way. We're not doing practices every evening and stuff. We just that's just not a lifestyle choice that we're making as a family. Other families make different choices. I get that. But man, to have a league that connects with my family in a way that doesn't burden my family by having all these practices and gone every weekend and all that stuff. I mean, I think that's where Upward Sports can also fill a gap, even in communities that have a lot of sports, because inevitably you're going to have spillover from some of these teams where, hey, yeah, we just didn't want to do practice 5 days a week. That's just a little much for us and for my kid. But Upward's great because it's fun, it's competitive, it's connected to a church. It's not as, I hate to say not as intense, because I'm sure you've had some pretty intense games at Upward Sports, but the time commitment, you're not selling your soul to do sports, perhaps is the better way to say it. So I also think the churches can help fill in the gaps with a lot of families, even in communities that, suburban communities that have a lot of sports. All right. So we're talking to Drew Provence, Director of Partner Engagement at Upward Sports. Drew, kind of land the plane here. What does 2024 look like? So let's say someone's hanging with us, they're listening, they go, okay, I get it. Recreation ministry is a good way to go. How do I want to get started in 2024. How do I do that? What does that look like for a pastor or church leader?
Yeah, love that question. Yeah, if you're a church and you're just discerning where God's leading you and you feel like he's at work and sports is a way to reach my community, I would just encourage you to let's talk now with our team. And so you'll want to go to upward.org, and we would love to have a conversation. I lead a team of consultants that are all across the country that have years of experience in helping churches do this. It's a really exciting time right now. Talk about 2024, God's been blessing the Upward ministry, where we've seen more churches now than ever join up with Upward. We've had over 400 churches that have stepped into partnership with us over the last 24 months. There's been over 220,000 kids participating in the last year, which grew by about 15,000 kids from the year prior. Like, God is doing something in communities all across the country. I know, Sam, you talk about the neighborhood church. Like, churches are looking to connect with their community right now. They are looking for ways to do that. And we are the sports crazy culture that we talked about. And I want to circle back to your point, Sam, you were talking about the over-calendared piece of families right now. There's a lot of things that are happening in 2023, 2024 that are happening with families that we can meet their needs. You talk about the cost of sports. The average family spends about $880 a year per sport for their child to play. That's an Aspen Institute stat. That's a lot of money. If you got multiple kids, that's a lot of money. That then is creating this wealth gap in sports. So if you come from a family that doesn't have wealth, you might not be playing sports. They say only about 34% of low-income families are participating in organized sports, while 70% are participating in wealthier families. And so that's a pretty big gap there. We're pushing kids out. So you even talk about the larger populated areas. There's a ton of kids, they can't afford to play. I can't afford to go travel across town, across states every other weekend to travel tournaments and then pay the registration fees for that. And so there's nowhere for me to play. And so there's an affordability issue that's out there. There's an access issue that's out there. There's the busyness issue, which you mentioned, of like, man, I feel like I'm just getting pulled in every direction. The expectations are so high. And so, like, man, this is an opportunity for the church to step in the gap here on really a cultural thing that's going on. There's other issues tied to it as well, whether it's mental health and the need for kids to get active on that end, the need for positive coaching and positive influences on kids' lives. There's so many things that you can step into in the sports realm to run a sports league to address in your community, probably, of what's happening. I would encourage you to just look around your community, see what's happening in the youth sports world, and are there needs there? There probably are. There probably are. When you think about cost, access, affordability, the importance of developing kids, there's probably a need there. So I would just encourage you to lean into that, to have a conversation with us. Our team would love to walk you through that and help make what could seem complex really simple.
Yeah, I like what you mentioned there about how this is the convergence of many different needs within a family, and it can converge around this idea of recreation ministry and sports. and how you're really meeting a lot of different kinds of needs through a program like Upward. So it's more than just sports. And I want people to hear that this is more than just, hey, we're having a good time on the field, we're having a good time on the court.
Yeah.
You're actually helping solve multiple kinds of problems in homes through recreation ministry. So I'd encourage you to go check out upward.org. That's right, Drew. I make sure I say that. So upward.org. I'm sure you can Google it and find it. Drew, everyone contact Drew, please. Everyone call Drew, ring his phone, and make him very, very busy after this episode, because now is the time. Now is the time. And Josh, I think now is the time for us to close this episode. What do you think?
I was pretty sure I was about to sneeze, and I was just about to mute my mic when you said Josh, and it just scared the sneeze out of me. It just went away, so it's gone. Yeah, thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Drew, for being on the show. Make sure that you look up both of our sponsors. We so appreciate them, and let us know how that's going. We would like to know, if you've already connected with Upward, how that's going for you on Twitter. Let us know, how many children you've led to Christ in that ministry. How many families have connected to your church? We'd love to celebrate that with you. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Upward Sports equips churches to run self-sustaining sports ministries in their communities. Whether you're a sports fanatic or on staff at a church, Upward Sports will give you all the tools you need to run a first-class sports ministry that allows you to reach families in your community. Upward Sports offers basketball, soccer, flag football, cheerleading, volleyball, baseball, and softball through league and camp offerings. At Upward Sports, we want to help your church make a difference and give you increased opportunities to share the gospel. Learn more today at upward.org/churchanswers.